Episode 130, Finding the Strengths in Your ADHD Child with Brigette Little.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
Parenting any child is difficult, but when you add on obstacles that don't fall within what most consider the normal range, parenting can become even more challenging. Coach Brigette Little is a parent that struggles with ADHD herself and has children who struggle from ADHD. These two dynamics can add more obstacles than can typically be present in parenting, but there is hope. Brigette helps parents of ADHD children learn to focus more on the strengths their child brings instead of the weaknesses. She has found that by focusing on strengths of an ADHD child, it helps everyone to look at the situation differently and to be able to come up with wonderful solutions and much better outcomes. If you are a parent of an ADHD child, or if you feel like you struggle with ADHD yourself, this is the episode for you. If you feel like you need extra help, please reach out to Brigette. She is a great resource and knows exactly how you are feeling and has a plethora of tools to help you see the strengths instead of just the weaknesses in your ADHD child.
Well, welcome to the podcast today. I don't know about your corner of the world, and when this airs, it'll be a little bit different, but I feel like I'm living in perpetual summer. However, you or my guest, Brigette Little, is probably in a place where it's not feeling like perpetual. I said perpetual summer. I meant perpetual winter. It's like perpetual winter. But you're in Texas?
Yeah, we're in Houston.
Yeah. So
we were swimming last week. So
yeah,
it's been nice.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, like I said, I have Coach Brigette Little with me today. And Brigette, will you introduce yourself and let people know a little bit about you? Brigitte's been on before, but we're going to be talking about something completely different this time than we did last time. So anyway, but first, give us an introduction.
Yeah. So I am Brigette Little. Like you said, I live in Houston, Texas, and I am the mother of 6, 5 of whom have ADHD in addition to myself. And so, over the years, parenting was a total adventure and an exercise in creativity and frustration sometimes, and, lots of different things. But I work with parents of children and teens with ADHD, which is a ton of fun.
That is awesome. And I don't know, I'm sure everybody has noticed this, but it seems that the diagnosis of that has increased greatly. And I'm sure a lot of it is just awareness and being aware what to look for. But I think also there are probably some things culturally that, or in society, that maybe contribute to that in some way too.
Yeah.
I don't know. What is your thoughts there? Does it seem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a lot more awareness. I got a psychology degree in the 90s. And when I think about what we were taught in an official setting versus what is available now, the science and our understanding has advanced tremendously. It used to be seen as mainly a behavioral thing, mainly little boys, and now we know, it is prevalent in both genders, and we know what the differences are in the ways it looks between boys and girls. We know that it goes beyond simple behavior and its differences in the reward structures in the brain. We know a little more about the neurobiology and all of the different functions that it affects. And so, and of course, with social media, there's a lot of people out there, showing how it shows up in their daily lives. And so I think there is a lot more awareness, particularly among women right now. I'm seeing a lot of women, and I fell into this boat too. I would have never dreamed that I had ADHD. I just thought I was lazy and unmotivated and, emotional and all these different things. And
that's fun. That's motivating in itself, right? Really great. To just think that about you.
I know,
Really
and it
fun.
wasn't until my adult son was diagnosed and I really kind of dove back into the subject that I started to recognize that, because we do have so much more information now, and we know a lot more about what it looks like in girls and women. And I could identify a lot of that in myself. So, yeah.
I'm curious what a child with ADHD struggles with that other children without a diagnosis don't struggle with.
Yeah.
What have you seen there? I think that's something that's important to talk about as we can start to grow our awareness of it.
Yeah. ADHD affects the areas of the brain that mainly govern the executive functions, and I think that's such a good word, because you think of an executive as kind of, directing the others what to do, and one of my favorite analogies is actually of an orchestra conductor. If you think of having a conductor in your brain that's conducting the orchestra, he's telling, the violins when to come in, he's governing the volume, the tempo, and he's kind of directing this so they make beautiful music together. Well, if your conductor's asleep or getting behind in their music, they're not going to be conducting, a beautiful music in their orchestra. And so that's what we see largely with ADHD, is this area that governs those executive functions is, sometimes underactive or underdeveloped. And so there are struggles with those functions. That's going to include things like task initiation, motivation, sustaining focus, prioritization, inhibition. So impulses come up, can they inhibit those, or do they just act on them? Emotional regulation. This is such an interesting one. Emotions can get really high, really fast. And sometimes that can be scary and they don't understand that. Working memory is frequently affected. So, holding information in your brain while you're doing something with it. The ability to break down large tasks into smaller pieces so you can work on those can be affected. And, things like the perception of time passing and cueing into nonverbal cues when they're talking to somebody else or to a peer. So all of these things can be affected. And, honestly, every human being is going to have strengths and weaknesses in these areas, right? But what you see with ADHD is there's more of an effect on daily life. This is something that's continually coming up. And so, you can have individuals with maybe ADHD tendencies that, are kind of able to push through and overcome. And then you have some people that aren't, that need some different strategies and interventions. So
I loved your analogy. And to me, Brigette is like the queen of analogies. I've worked with her before. I've spoken with her and done podcasts, and I love your analogies. I think that was really helpful for me to see it that way.
Yeah. And that's from Thomas Brown. I can't take credit for that one, but it's my favorite.
Yeah, but it really does do a good job of explaining it. And I heard some things there, the different things, how it manifests itself that I wasn't aware of, and I hadn't really been educated in that to the extent. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. How do you tell the difference between those normal executive function versus the normal stages of development though, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a difference there.
Yeah.
But it's hard to tell.
Right. Any 2-year-old is not going to have good inhibition, right?
No.
And so, yeah, there are that's a great question. One thing that's really fascinating to me is they have found that the ADHD brain on average has about a 30% delay in development. So in physical development. So, eventually that physical development catches up. But some of these executive functions are dependent on that development. So you're going to see some of these kids having these executive functions come online later. And so, maybe you see, kids that are 7 years old that are starting to pick up on social cues a bit more and, take hints and context from their friends in social situations. And the child with ADHD, maybe his brain is more like he's 4 or 5. And he's not cluing into those at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, there are going to be social consequences to that, right? There are going to be teachers and friends and other people that have expectations, and this child's behavior is going to seem to be out of sync with that. You're going to have this, grow up, act your age, different things like that. It's the same with ability to sustain focus. It's interesting as I work with parents, a lot of times, sometimes they'll be frustrated. They're like, my child's 16, they should be able to do this. And a question I ask frequently is, how old are they really? And they're like 12. And they can almost always give me a number of where they are developmentally as far as these executive functions are concerned. It's important to note this has nothing to do with intelligence. They're frequently really smart. They understand what you're saying, but, the ability to function in some of these areas is behind,
Does that translate to a lot to frustration for them? Like they understand what you're saying, but they can't do it? Or, okay.
Yeah. And there's frustration on both parts. You'll have, and I know this feeling really well. It's like, okay, I know I need to do the thing. I want to do the thing. I understand it's important. I know how to do it, and I cannot make myself go. I have no go button, completely missing. And so, that was really frustrating for me. And it's frustrating for parents because, they're talking to their kids, they're coming to solutions, they're agreeing on things that are going to happen. And it doesn't, or the child completely forgets, or they're off doing something else. And that can be really frustrating for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. That 30% delay was, as soon as you said that, I found myself going, what's the number I can't do math. I don't think so. I found my brain trying to figure that out. But so you were saying like a 7-year-old, 30% delay would be like a 4 or 5-year-old, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if my mathing is good there or not.
Yeah. But that seems about right. Like a third would be, the 30% would be a third. This is where my brain went when you said that. It went to the math of it. So anyway, I just had to.
Yeah, where that frequently hits people really hard is when you have, high school seniors moving on to college because they're 18, they're taking this big step where it's not only like, okay, you have to manage school. Now it's, you have to make your own meals. You have to feed yourself. You have to, add all these different things in, especially if they're going away to school. A lot of these things that draw really heavily on the executive function, and their executive function may be more like a 14-year-old. And so that can be really, a difficult time where you see a lot of kids will just kind of hit the wall, and things the wheels come off a little bit.
I'm also thinking about missionaries that may or may not know that they have ADHD. And it's such a big shift for them to be away from their family. There's no like gradual separation, like you get when you go to college. If you go straight on a mission, like a lot of them do anymore, then I would imagine that that's a really,
and it really depends on where the exact struggles are. Some of them do very well with that as a transition period because it is so highly structured.
Yes.
And they know what's expected of them every day. And it's kind of, they don't have to make a lot of those decisions. So a lot of them do really well with that experience. And then they're a little more developed and ready for school afterward. And so, it really depends on the individual and, where the struggles are. Is it, are they more academic? Is it more in decision making? Is it, keeping my teeth brushed every day? Is it? Yeah. And so
that's a good point.
Vary quite a bit.
Really good point. Okay. You mentioned something before about strengths. I heard you say there's we all have strengths and weaknesses in these areas, but why do you think it's important to approach the challenges of ADHD from a perspective of a child's strengths, which it's probably, and it's very easy for us to focus on our kids' weaknesses, but tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. And, this is something I think is so critically important because it is so easy to focus on the weaknesses. And we do that because we love them. Like we don't want to see them fall on their faces. We don't want to see them get in trouble. So we're like, okay, let's shore up all this stuff so that, you can participate and function. And so, what happens frequently is parents start putting a lot of emphasis on those areas, where their kids are struggling. And, what we pay attention to grows. And if you think about, a child and a teen as they're developing and, they're developing this identity of who they are and, what their characteristics are, and they're getting negative messages frequently in a lot of different settings, at school, at church, with their peers, in public, they can be getting, these messages of you're too much, calm down, don't do that, all this in lots of different settings. And so, you think about that developing identity, and a lot of them will be thinking, okay, I'm disruptive, I'm hyper. For me, I was like, okay, I'm lazy, I'm undisciplined, I'm irresponsible, I lose everything. There's just all these things that they start believing about themselves. And, I found that ADHDers are also really good at forgetting the good stuff. Like they will do something and accomplish something and frequently dismiss it like, well, everybody should be able to do that. And so it doesn't even count, They just let those things drop off the radar. And so a lot of those get lost. And, when you start focusing on the strengths, you're doing a couple things. One, you're helping them to anchor those and you're drawing attention to that, which is really, really important for their identity. It's also important for you as a parent to be recognizing those things too. That can change a lot of things. But when you start focusing on the successes and the strengths, you're also kind of finding the key out of some of the weaknesses, right? When you can look at the things they're good at and what they're doing well, you can then start to extract principles out of that are going to help with the weak areas. So maybe they're not going to do homework the way you did it or the way other kids do it, where they come home from school, pull out a backpack, but if you see, okay, when they do this thing, their brain really gets in gear and they can, crank out a lot of stuff and do it. And you can start taking some of those principles and some of those things that they're good at and pulling those into your strategies. Then you start solving some of the weaknesses in ways that are really normal and natural for them and things that they're good at. Yeah.
And I would think also from a parent's perspective, when you are noticing their strengths, it's not as frustrating for you either. You're starting to see rather than dwelling on their weaknesses, because that's not ever fun. We want to see our kids from a positive perspective. And so, if we are focusing on their strengths, we're naturally going to feel better about them, and they're going to feel better about themselves because they're going to feel they're going to mirror us. They're going to feel that difference.
Yeah. I remember kind of an aha I had with my oldest son. I think he was in kindergarten and they were doing this little performance for the school. And he had been given this role where, I can't even remember what the poem was, but he had to rattle off all these silly cow names, and they were really funny there. But he had to memorize all of these and be able to say them in order. And he was only 5. And I remember trying to work with him at home and we were repeating him over and over and we were clapping and we're doing rhythm and he was getting so frustrated. He's like, I hate this. I don't want to do this. I can't get it. I'm just dumb, and all this. And it was just that moment of inspiration. I'm sure it was just the spirit saying, try this, but I recognized, okay, he is really good at remembering things he sees. And, he couldn't fully read yet, but I made these posters that kind of represented the different names. And, he had it in 2 seconds. Once he could see those, he could take this mental picture in his mind and he had it, because he was really good at that. And so, that was something that we just pulled in that made it easy, and there's going to be, your kids are going to have performance strengths, which I think that's more of a performance strength. And they're also going to have character strengths. Some kids are really kind. Some have a real sense of fairness. Some have, all these different character strengths. And those are things you can draw on for motivation, and things that they can bring to the table in other settings. And so being aware of those, really helps you to figure out, okay, what is this kid's operating manual going to look like? And it helps set them up to be able to do that for themselves too.
Yeah. I think to me that I'm listening to you and thinking as parents listening, they probably already feel overwhelmed with just trying to figure out how to be a parent to this child in general. And just being a parent in general is overwhelming and makes us, I don't know, I can feel burned out all the time, but how do you help parents know what to look for and what their children's strengths are without going into that, feeling like there's one more thing, without going into overwhelm and burnout?
Yeah. One of my favorite ways to do that is just to create, I call it my awesome archive. And I do this for myself because I forget things too. But, I just have a note on my phone and it syncs to my computer. So no matter where I am, I have it with me. And when I accomplish something that I feel good about, I write it in there. And you can do that for your kids. Maybe it's, they shared with their sibling without getting in an argument, or, they were kind and reached out to somebody else, or they got their homework done. They can be really small things or they can be bigger things. but start keeping track of those. And then every now and then have a time that you kind of look at those and you break them down, so maybe you're looking at, what did my child do to accomplish that? What are some of the things that came naturally? What are the strengths that they drew on to do that? And you're going to start to see patterns in that. So it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be simply just keeping a list of the successes and then going in and breaking those down a little bit and saying, okay, what do I see here? What am I noticing in this?
Yeah, I love that. And don't we love that we have this device that's like attached to our bodies anymore, that we can keep track of anything on? But imagine how your kid would feel if someday you were like, hey, look at this list, and just showed it to them, like the list that I think that would be great for you, to have those access to those reminders and to be able to see what's behind it, but then also great for them, for you to be able to show it to them occasionally when they're feeling like they're worthless, right?
Exactly. And, another benefit to this that I see is it really changes the parent's perspective, because when they're looking for the things that are going right, they're recognizing, okay, my kid really is succeeding in a lot of things that, I wasn't noticing. And they do share a lot of those things. It's an opportunity, when you've written stuff down, to say, hey, you really did a great job in this, or congratulations on this. And, it helps. That whole relationship begins to change, and the parent's perspective begins to change too,
Yeah. And when a parent's perspective changes, the relationship naturally follows suit.
Yeah.
We don't often realize that, but, and we think that we need to focus more on changing our kid if we want to change our relationship. But most of the power and the like the strength growing of a relationship happens even with just one person making a shift and that follow. Okay. So I know as parents though, like we see things sometimes like I think he could work on this. My child could work on this. Like we see things that we notice as a quote unquote weakness.
Yeah.
And how do we address those? How do you address those without, I don't know. I'm always afraid I'm going to damage my kid. And certainly there's like a long list of things that I've done that my kids are going to need therapy for. But how do you educate us on that?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And, I'm trying to figure out what point to dive in here. When we're looking at weaknesses, I think it would be good first to say, okay, why do I see this as a weakness?
As a weakness. Yeah.
Because, with kids with ADHD, the majority of the things that are problematic is because we live in a world that is set up to value timeliness, completion, discipline, all these things that, favors the 90% of the population that functions that way. And we have to function within this world. I recently went down a rabbit hole and started looking at Leonardo da Vinci, who, many believe had ADHD, and like over 80% of his projects went unfinished, and they were in art and anatomy and invention and all these different areas. But when we think of him, we think Renaissance man, he was interested in all these other things, and you dive in and nobody cares that he was paid to do things and never finished them, and that all these things never got done, right?
I think someone somewhere probably cared.
The person that paid probably cared. We don't care.
Yeah.
And we look at what he did accomplish in the volume of those things, and we think of him as a genius, because at that time that was what was praised and valued, right? Mm-hmm. And we live in a society that's very different than that. And so, that's where some of these so-called weaknesses come in. And so then you can kind of ask yourself, okay, does this matter? And, some of it does. We're right now with our high school senior, he just forgets assignments exist. He doesn't mean to.
So convenient.
He's like, I turned that in and it's in his backpack. And so, we had a conversation one day, and, I realized we were pushing on a lot of things. We're, trying to figure a lot of this out. And I asked him one day, I'm like, do you want to graduate from high school? And he said, yeah, I do. And then I said, okay, when do you want to graduate? Do you want it to be in May, or do you want to retake some of this during the summer and do it then? And he goes, no, I think I want to graduate with my class. And then we were like, okay, well, then we're going to have to bring this up, and how are we going to do it? And he was part of that process, and And, some of our kids are going to be young and, we're not going to turn a lot of those decisions over. But, we can kind of, now let me circle back to where we were. But yeah, some of the things we are going to have to find ways to function within this, because the things we want are going to require us to be able to complete assignments, to, get our education, to do these things so we can get into the areas that we want to. And, our relationships, being timely is good for our relationships, and we do want those things. And so, there are a lot of things that can help with that. Medication can help, strategies can help. There are a lot of different ways you can go. And so a lot of times, when we identify an area that we need to shore up, we may be looking at, okay, we want to work on time blindness because it's affecting our relationships and it's affecting, school and work and different things. And so we can start to look at, what is the root of the problem? Is it that I'm not perceiving time passing? Is it that I'm underestimating how long it's going to take me to do certain things? Is it that steps are completely falling out of my head? I think, okay, I need to get up and take a shower and get dressed, and that takes 10 minutes, but I'm not accounting for finding my shoes and getting my backpack and making my lunch. Those steps are just falling off my radar. And, so the strategy that we employ is just going to depend on, okay, what's at the root of, what's causing the issue there. And then, there are just things that you can put into place that solve for those.
Yeah.
It can just become strategies.
I've not heard the phrase time blindness before.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a fantastic phrase. So good. I think all of that is such good advice. I feel like it's in some way a trick question because, like I said, quote unquote weaknesses, because I do think that we have to get to the point where we don't always quickly think that something is a weakness.
Yeah.
That why do we have to define it that way? Because first of all, most likely it's not. A lot of times it's not a problem. If you learn how to work around it or how to work with it, and looking at them as weaknesses is just not helpful in
and
every instance.
And I think on the flip side of everything that we consider a weakness is also a strength. I think with my boys, impulsivity was a thing when they were kids. I don't know how many times I could hear them thinking and I was like, stop, turn your brain on, think for a second, and try to get in between that. But now, that most of them are grown, one of our favorite things, we get together and we play Jackbox games, and you've got to come up with quick answers. And we have so much fun, and they are so funny. My 3 oldest kids are married now, and these spouses come into the family and they're like, I can't even get my answer submitted before you're all off and running. They're trying to keep up, and, and it's the same function,
I do think that is so important to note, that most of the time our perceived weaknesses are our strengths overused. We are overusing them in some way, and we start to perceive them as a weakness. And so when you see them as two sides of the same coin, first of all, I think it gives us a glimpse of what our strengths are, the things that we are really good at. It helps us to then dive in a little bit deeper. And second of all, then it takes away the sting, so that we're not always thinking, oh, this is terrible. And it's much easier to work with something if we're not judgmental about it.
Yeah. And if I can just share a little story with that, I remember when one of my boys was 8, he was really struggling. And I remember being in the car one day and I was driving, he was in the back seat. I'm crying, I'm feeling totally inadequate as a mother. And I remember just kind of praying in that moment. And he was in need of a lot of structure at that point in his life. And I was really bad at providing that. I had trouble following through on my own things I set up, let alone trying to do that for all these kids. And, I remember being in the car and just praying and just kind of pouring out my heart and saying, Heavenly Father, he needs something that I can't do, and I guess I was whining a little bit. I was kind of like, why did you pick me? because I feel like I'm failing this child, and it's not that I wanted to get rid of him or wanted him to go somewhere else. I love him to pieces, but I just remember the spirit in that morning, in that moment, coming in and saying, he needs your flexibility more than he needs your structure. And I recognized that my ability to drop everything and talk to him when he needed it, that I was providing a lot of those things that he needed that I wasn't recognizing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the same two sides of the same coin. Maybe I'm not good at following through and being consistent, but I can absolutely be there emotionally and be there in those moments where kids need you right now. I'm not going to say no after I do the dishes. I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm all in. I'm right there. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
That is a really sweet story. And I want to also just even bring out the point that our greatest partner in all of this is our heavenly parents and our Savior. Like, we have this source that we can tap into that really can bring us some enlightenment and show us when we are not able to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really want to emphasize that point too, because during these years that my kids were growing up, I had no idea that 5 of them had ADHD. I didn't know I did. I just knew that none of the parenting advice that I got from friends or books or anything worked.
All a bunch of baloney.
I know. I'm like, nope. Not gonna fly. And so I really did rely on that inspiration and that information. And it was interesting later, post-diagnosis, and then as I got, further training in ADHD specific coaching, to realize, oh, we actually did all of that. We did all those things and it worked beautifully. And, things were really good in our home. Now they struggled in other settings because we didn't know what was going on, but that inspiration was spot on. And the Lord does know exactly what our kids need and is willing to provide that.
So true.
Yeah.
So what are the differences? What are the differences you see in your children and yourself and in the life of your clients as you've worked with them on focusing on their strengths in children with ADHD?
I think the first thing I see, and that's one of my favorite things, is kind of the big sigh of relief of, what, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not, deficient. I'm not a horrible human. This is just a reality of the way my brain functions, and it's okay, or this is the way my child is, and it's okay. And, a good point to bring up is this is a highly heritable tendency. And so a lot of times parents are dealing with the same tendencies, whether they have a diagnosis or not. And so sometimes, you'll see a parent that is feeling very down on themselves because they're impatient, and you look at what's going on in that situation and realize, you have some sensory sensitivities, you've got this going on, your executive function has been taxed. And, to just see that sigh of relief that, okay, there's an explanation for why these things are happening. There's an explanation for why we're all feeling this way. And, it's not just that we're doing life wrong. It's not that we're parenting wrong, and that there's things that you can do to support those things, is really good. I also love the shift I see as parents begin looking at their kids a little differently, because I think with these children and teens, there's frequency, a tendency to look at them and say, okay, but they won't do this. I've told them a million times, they know this, they won't do it. And when they start to realize, okay, it's not that they're being willfully defiant, it's that there's an obstacle in the way here, and that we can partner together to address that. And that whole relationship changes and becomes more positive. And those kids start to feel a little more seen and heard and supported, instead of feeling like they've just got someone riding their back all the time. So, yeah.
Those two words, defiant and obstacle, give you a completely different perspective on things. It just shifts the way that I instantly felt in that moment when you described them that way, viewing them that way. I think that was a great.
The story just popped into my head right now as you said that, in the Old Testament, of Balaam and his donkey, where he wants the donkey to go and he won't, and he's like whipping the donkey, and finally the donkey talks and is like, do you not see the angel blocking the way here? And that just popped into my head right there. A lot of times as parents, we don't see the obstacle, but the child is feeling it. They may not be able to put a name on it. They may not be able to tell us, like the donkey couldn't till their mouth was open, but when you recognize that it's there, then you start looking for a way around it. Yeah.
Such a great point. Brigette, this has been fascinating for me. And you have a way with words that I think is really easy to, I don't know, take in and understand. And I appreciate your perspective so much. I would love for people to know where they can get more information, where they can find more of you. Can you share that with us?
Yes. So my website is briggettelittle.com, and that's Brigettete. There's a little bit of unique spelling there. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at Brigette Little Coaching.
Awesome. We for sure, like usual, will link to those things in our show notes. But thank you for being here. Is there anything that we have missed that you wanted to share with us? I always have to make sure.
So. I think we covered a lot of ground. That was fun.
We did good. It was a great conversation. I've learned so much. So thank you. And I appreciate it. And I'm grateful to all of our listeners that are here today. And certainly we all know people who could benefit from hearing this message. It's such a fine line, right? When I'm like, share this with your friends. And, you always think, how do I share this without it making it sound like, okay, I've noticed you guys seem a little bit like you're a mess over there. Maybe you could use this, but
I think what I love is these same principles I think can apply to any kids.
Yeah. For sure. We all just want to be better parents. We all just want to give them love and help them succeed. And I'm so glad that we have tools out there to help us do that. So thank you. Thanks for helping us today. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. We'll see you again next time. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.